Bruchim Habaim. Welcome everybody to our webinar that we're doing. This is the first time we're doing this, hopefully not the last time we're doing this in some sense. This is what we call our Pandemic Passover to Remember webinar. And I'm joined by Rabbi Aimee Gerace, and we're going to be here to share, I'm going to say, sort of our top tips for having a memorable seder in general, especially in this time, but not only in this time. And so I've got some ideas. Rabbi Aimee's got some ideas. We'll do that for about half an hour max, and then we want to open it up to your questions. And just as a reminder, this is being recorded, and the best way to ask us questions is in the chat. So, and if anybody, for whatever reason, can't ask questions in the chat, feel free to raise your hand in participants, or let our webinar coordinator, Andrea Mark, no. And thank you, Andrea, for doing this with us. So with that, I'm going to ask, Rabbi Aimee, do you want to say a few words before we get started?
Just that I'm really excited to share wisdom that I've gleaned from being a seder participant for the last 30 years. And as a parent, as an educator, and I think that the tips that I have, they're good for adults too, right? Not just for kids. We're all kids, overgrown children. So I think that you'll find they will be pretty helpful across the board. All right.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really glad you're joining me for this. So
me too. Thanks for having me.
I'm also glad because thanks to my lack of Zoom update, I can't share my slides. And so Rabbi Aimee is going to be sharing slides for me today. So
working on it.
Let's go. All right. We'll hit the little slideshow thingamabob. Okay, welcome to a Passover to Remember, our webinar. These are some tips that I have that I found over the years to be terribly useful. My tip count is at 4 because that's a very Passover-y number. We have 4 cups. We have 4 questions. We have 4 different types of children, and we'll be touching on those things over the course of this. But so I've got 4 very important things that I want you to keep in mind as you're thinking about your Passover Seder this year. But first, I want to tell a story, and I call this story A Tale of Two Sdarim. So let's take a look. These are a couple of different seders that I've been to. Here's the first seder that I ever went to. So Rabbi Aimee's been doing seders longer than I have. My first seder that I remember was when I went over to the house of the family of my Jewish girlfriend in college. And this is actually years before I became Jewish myself, but this was my first experience with a Passover Seder. And what I'm trying to relate to you in this picture is that it was one thing that I remember, it was terribly orderly. Right. I'm not trying to say that Passover is for tools. No, heaven forbid. I'm trying to tell you that one thing I remember was how orderly it was. In fact, the word itself, seder, means order, or the order of the things that you do to mark Passover. And we've been doing this for a while now. We've gotten very good at it, and then it's very well organized. There are 14 different parts to the Seder. You might get a booklet, a little instruction booklet that's could be anywhere between a quick start guide, short Haggadah, or the whole Megillah. You do you. I really love the Jonathan Safran Foer Megillah, which looks like a coffee table book. It's that big. But everything is in order to say, okay, we're going to do the right things at the right time, and we're not going to switch them around. And my first Passover Haggadah, and I don't know if anybody else had this experience, was the Maxwell House Haggadah. Many years ago, the Maxwell House Coffee Company, not owned by Jewish people, but owned by very smart people who realized that there was a spike in coffee sales at this particular time of year in spring when Jewish people were staying up late to have dinner. And so they noticed that they were selling a lot of coffee, and they said, hey, let's put together a Haggadah so that people will think of us when they're doing their Passover shopping. And everything's very well laid out. You start with candles and Kiddush, and you go through all the steps. You wash your hands in a certain way, and there's a time you wash your hands where you don't say the blessing, and there's a time you wash your hands where you do say the blessing, and it's all very well laid out. And some families have traditions where there's one particular person who leads the entire Seder. Some families have traditions where you go around the table and people take turns leading the seder, but you do the same parts every year. And that's a good thing because people are excited to remember what Passover is all about, to maintain these family traditions. The order itself becomes part of the ritual that connects people from one generation to another. And so just to say, my first Seder was a very orderly Seder, and that's what I remember. Now, let me tell you about the second Seder that not the second Seder that I went to, but another very memorable Seder in my life. Can we go to the next slide? So this looks a little bit different. And this Seder looked very different. This was many years later when I was married. Not to the person that I went to the first Seder with, but this was many years after many years of observing Seders and pretty much sticking to the Maxwell House model. I'd just gotten married to my current and final wife, and we wanted to put on a Seder. This was our first household as a married couple. We wanted to have people over. This was very important to us. When we were dating, we always went to other people's Seders. And we wanted to have a Seder of our very own. The trick is the Jewish people that we knew all had other Seders to go to. People had their regular first night date, their second night date, going back years, if not generations. And so we had nobody who could come to our Seder. They were already committed, but we really wanted to have a Seder ourselves. And so what we did is we invited all of our friends over who weren't Jewish and didn't have Passover plans. And we figured that, okay, not everybody's going to get into this Maxwell House book right away. Most of our friends have never experienced anything like this. Neither of us had really led Seders by ourselves before. And so we figured, okay, how are we going to have the most fun doing it? How are they going to have the most fun and get the most out of the experience? So we completely deconstructed it. We took the 14 parts that are in the Maxwell House Haggadah, and we realized there are going to be 14 people there. Right? It's us and 12 friends. So what we did is we took each of the different parts and we made a one-page kind of guide to that part of the Seder with little steps to say or words to say, steps to take, and a funny little cartoon I found on the internet. And we took it. So each part had one page and we folded them up and we made place cards for people. And so as we went through the order of the Seder, we went around the table and everybody opened up their card and did the thing that was on the card. And it was a fresh experience for everyone. So it wasn't as organized or by the book as Seders that had been the totality of my experience, but it was one of the most meaningful Seders I've ever had. And every year, my wife says, "Can we do that Seder again, please?" We've gone back to the Maxwell House model, but can we please go back and do that Seder? So who knows? That might be our second Seder this year. So I wanted to tell this story to say there are lots of different ways you could do Passover. Passover is perhaps the most popular Jewish holiday there is. So they did some surveys a few years ago. They asked people various Jewish things that they do. And do you light candles? Do you go to services? Do you belong to a synagogue? Do you fast on Yom Kippur? Do you attend a Passover Seder? And whereas something like 10% of people light candles on Shabbat, maybe 50% of adult Jews fast for Yom Kippur, something like 70% of Jewish people attend a Passover Seder. And so it's important, it's popular, but that doesn't mean there's only one right way to do it. And that's one of the things that I want to unpack today. So let's go to the first slide. These are my 4 tips for having a pandemic Passover to remember. Number 1, the theme of the holiday is freedom. Remember that you're free. There's lots of good reasons to follow an order or follow some traditions to do the things that you do every year. But if you're doing something the same this year because you did it last year, I want you to have that intention that you're doing it because you are free to choose to do it, right? If you need to have it be a little bit different this year, and God knows there are many things that we wanted to do before that we can't do this year, that's okay. You're a free person. You get to make choices around the constraints that you have. The things that are in the seder, making kiddush, lighting candles, telling the story, making a sandwich like Hillel made a sandwich back in the day. These are all things that are given to us to do with how we will, to do with them in the way that makes most sense in our lives. And just because our Hillel sandwich looks a little bit different from our Hillel sandwich last year, and just because instead of the people around the chairs, we might have a bunch of laptops or iPads set up, that's okay. We have that freedom to make Passover meaningful in the way that we have to. So let's take a look at tip number 2. So tip number 2 is, remember, it's a symposium, not a service. And the picture I wanted to share with you, this was a party that was, I think it's Thornton Wilder. I think he's the guy smelling the flower there. And one of the women around him is Gertrude Stein, and another is Alice B. Toklas. I was looking for a good shot of a salon in the Gertrude Stein style. And I wanted a Gertrude Stein salon because when I looked for pictures of Greek symposia, it was all men. And that's not necessarily the seder that I insist people have. So the original idea for a seder was that it started in, let's say, the Hellenistic period of Greek culture. People were telling the Passover story every year before that, but as our seders, the way we have them today, developed, it was developed in the Hellenistic times. And the rabbis said, hey, we should mark Passover the way some of our Greek neighbors will get together, and the B'nai Chorin, the free people of the free caste of the society, would get together. They would have a festive meal, and they would recline while they were eating, and they would discuss philosophy or discuss poetry or discuss the ideas of the day and working. And so our rabbis copied that model to say that, when we say we recline, so many of the Passover seders I've been to, you're sitting in a rigid chair for 4 hours, and just about 4 times while you're drinking wine, you lean over for a second. And if that's your custom, I'm not knocking it. But the thing was designed to be much more like a Greek symposium or a salon of interesting people discussing interesting ideas in a casual way. And so that's the original model for the Seder, not a synagogue service where we go page 1 to page 375 in 2 hours and 30 minutes flat. If having a Seder like that is a meaningful connection to your ancestors, go right ahead. But it was originally designed as a much more free environment where people could discuss the story, the meaning, the ideas of Passover in a casual, comfortable way, because that's how we embody being a free people. Let's go to tip number 3. So in my mind, accessibility supersedes accuracy when it comes to the Passover Seder. Again, Maxwell House makes a great Haggadah, and there are lots of great Haggadahs to choose from. And what I want to encourage you to do is, instead of trying to do everything word for word according to the guide that's in front of you, have the intention of making it accessible to everyone there. This is embodied in a particular part of the Magid section when we talk about the 4 types of children. Sometimes it's they call them the 4 sons because it's Arba Banim, but Banim also means children, so they could be any kind of children. And I purposefully picked matzah for this to say they could be all kinds of children. But the idea of the 4 sons here, if you go from let's say right to left, as Hebrew does, we have the wise matzah child. We have the child that doesn't have the ability to ask questions. We have the Rasha. We have sort of the wicked matzah child, and then we have the simple child. And so, and in my mind, I'm not sure wise necessarily means having the ideas and having all the answers. Sometimes, in my mind, being wise is being open to simplicity and having the most questions. And so I encourage you to do your Seder in a way that everybody present has both input and has the ability to understand what's going on, rather than necessarily sticking to a script and hoping everybody else catches up to it. So accessibility, that's the nature of this, is that Passover is supposed to be done in a way that everybody can take something away from it and that everybody can contribute to the discussion. So let's go to cup number 4, shall we? Finally, so we have a few mitzvot, we have a few commandments, we have a few instructions or deeds that are around Passover. For me, they all boil down to this: is asking questions. Remember, a few years ago, one of my teachers gave me this insight as to, why do we do all these strange things? In fact, this is embedded in the question Manishtana, or the 4 questions that we have. Why do we dip vegetables in salt water? Why do we recline when we're eating? Why do we do this? Why do we do that? The 4 questions, if you take a close look, has one answer. We do these things because of what God did for me when I left Egypt. And so the takeaway for me at that time was all of these things that we do on Passover that are different from the rest of the year are designed to encourage people to ask questions. And not just to get to that unitary answer of because we're free, because God freed us from slavery in Egypt. The answer sometimes is less important than the fact that people are asking questions. So if you use the Passover seder, the dipping the stuff in the salt water, eating matzah instead of bread, if these spark questions, that's great. But feel free to do something else. A great example that we talk about this time of year is the idea of the orange on the seder plate. And there are a few different versions of the story, but it originates with I believe it was Susanna Heschel had this idea of having an orange on a seder plate to make us ask the question, why isn't our observance of Judaism more egalitarian? And so we're talking about, and people have added to the Seder plate. People have added a Kos Miriam to recognize Miriam's contribution to the Exodus. People have added different parts of their Seder to prompt that question. And so however you want to prompt questions this year, I was in a talk earlier talking about some issues of justice around the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. What do we put on our Seder plate this year to prompt questions to get us to think about the plight of other people that we share this country with? And so whatever you can do to prompt people to ask questions is a mitzvah when it comes to running a Passover Seder. So those are the 4 tips that I wanted to share with you today. I really want to get into what questions you have right after Rabbi Aimee shares her teaching with you. But I just want to conclude this part by saying thank you. Thank you so much for signing up for this and for being a part of our community and our learning Havarah here today. So with that, I want to hand it over to Rabbi Aimee.
Thank you. I'm going to save your PowerPoint so that I can prepare my Seder using your tips, which have some overlap with mine. But I am meant to be talking about how specifically to engage children. And I'm going to share my screen. Nope, that's your PowerPoint, Rabbi Carrier. Oh boy, exit. I should have reopened mine. There it is. All right. All right. So we have 6, not 4, 6 ways to engage children in a Seder. And one of the questions you might be asking is, why should we engage children anyway? What do they know, these children? And because isn't the right answer. It's because Maimonides said, who's Maimonides? A 12th century genius who looks great in bronze. And he told us that he wrote, so we have it, okay? He told us that we need to be so engaging that our only job is to get children to ask questions at a seder, that even if we need to get their attention by pulling the tablecloth out from underneath the way that it's set, we should do that to make sure they're paying attention. I have never had to go that far. I'm not a magician, but I can just imagine Maimonides being very upset at children running around and like yanking the table. I would have loved to have seen that. It is a dream of mine. It's a nerdy dream. Okay. So because Maimonides told us so, this is why we need to engage children. But once again, we are nothing if not big children. And so this is meant for us as well. If we're not engaged, kids aren't going to be engaged. They can smell it on us. They can smell that boredom. So we need to do the best that we can. So I thought number 6, we're going backwards. We're going to count up down to our number 1. Why not introduce some new and different traditions from different cultures, different backgrounds in your seder? So this could be exciting for you. Have you been aching to learn about a Sephardic tradition, like smacking each other with green onions? I have not done that at my seder, but this might be the perfect year to do that. Have you learned about the Bukharan Jews? Over here in the bottom left corner, the Bukharan Jews who wear these gorgeous kaftans during their seder. I'd be very scared to do that because the amount of grape juice we consume, I would not want to pay for this dry cleaning bill. But the Bukharans do it beautifully. I also found when I was looking up, like how can I show different cultures for Passover? This idea of the African American seder plate. This was created by someone who lives in the Gullah Coast in South Carolina. And there are many African Americans who celebrate Passover, and these are really beautiful examples of what they would have on their seder plate, in addition to a traditional Jewish seder plate. So learning a little bit about that, sharing that with people. Number 5. I have this GIF here because this is where we are in my house right now. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I hear why incessantly. So this is the holiday for my children. How can we have age-appropriate discussions? The younger the children are, the more knowledge-based, content-based you want your questions to be. This is making them feel proud of what they learned in religious school or what they learned in preschool, that they can share. The older they are, at about 9 years old, children start to develop critical thinking skills. Some of them, not all of them, they start to develop critical thinking skills, and you can ask deeper questions. So for a younger child, you might ask, which symbol on the seder plate is the tastiest for you, the most important? Why? What would you add to the seder plate for someone who's a little bit older, who wants to join in that discussion of why there's an orange or why there's a piece of fair trade chocolate on the seder plate? That's my favorite thing to add currently. Why is there hand sanitizer on the seder plate? Which is what we added last year. For even older children, you would ask, how did the Israelites feel when they were slaves? And you can really put yourself, as we're supposed to, in the position of the slaves in Egypt and really wonder what it was like from day to day, to be working incessantly, to be treated so poorly. These are really, really great questions to ask that will also help you and your children, or whatever children you have around your table, really relate to other people who are feeling oppressed. And then my favorite question of all time, which is, what does it mean that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, taking away free will? This is a really fun discussion to have at your table about free will versus everything being ordained by God. And hopefully, as Rabbi Carrier said, it will engender all the questions, which is the point of Pesach. Number 4, make sure you have your Passover playlist ready. I was saying earlier before we started that you do need to be a little bit careful out there on the internet, because you never know what you're going to find when you ask the interwebs to come up with something for you. So make sure that your Passover playlist has been vetted by someone in the know. But I put down here some examples for you of who has some Passover music for you to listen to. In my car right now, we are really, really big into Shira Klein's Shir La La Pesach. She sings Pesach Bamba, which is La Bamba, but the Passover version. We're very into it in the car. She also sings Elijah Rock, which is a favorite camp song of mine. So I do highly recommend Shira Klein for the younger set. But the Prince of Egypt soundtrack is a 99 classic. Also, you don't have to just stick to Passover music. You can have music with just Passover themes. As we know, freedom is a thing. If you want to play Aretha Franklin, everyone will get it. If you want to play Joy to the World by Three Dog Night, Jeremiah was a bullfrog, right? You can absolutely do that as well. And this is a great way to get older kids involved. They can create a playlist for you. You don't have to do it. Ask someone else to outsource that. Number 3, do anything that will keep the kids sitting at the table. You could lose these kids so quickly. At our table, it depends on what you're comfortable with, because it is a holiday and some people don't write or cut. In our house, those things are okay. And so we have coloring books, but Play-Doh is cool. Some people play bingo. How many times does like Grandma Bert, spill the wine glass, something like that. You can have on your bingo card. And it really, really keeps the kids where you need them to be. This is a picture of my son for the 3 seconds he was sitting at the table 2 years ago. You can see he's wearing a mask. It's the darkness. It looks like it's the plague of darkness. There are all sorts of activities that you can search on Pinterest that will help you build up some resources to make sure you have at your table. Choose the Haggadah that's right for you. Rabbi Carrier talked about this with accessibility. I've put up some examples here. There does exist on the World Wide Web a 30-minute seder, a 60-minute seder. You can if timing is really important, go there and supplement as you need. The ones I've put up here are really, really excellent for the people who really need to like build in the time to create a seder. You can't wing it, folks. Don't try. So if you want to spend a little extra time, a night to remember and a different night are really, really excellent for discussion questions, skits, really big things. The PJ Library Family Haggadah is one that our family is using right now, just because of the age of our kids. There are some really great, easy discussion questions in there. Things are laid out really nicely. It's colorful. So I feel like it's our new Maxwell House. Because I bought 40 copies and I have to find them actually. This reminded me that I need to search for them. And then obviously the Hogwarts Haggadah, because everything should have a little Harry Potter in it. But once again, the internet is a wonderful place, and some people collect Haggadot. That's the plural of Haggadah. Some people have like very artsy Haggadot, like a coffee table book, like the Jonathan Safran Foer. But you can have people use all different ones, as long as you can keep them, on the same page, and pick out which pieces you like. There are websites where you can create your own. The possibilities are endless. You just have to put in the work ahead of time to make sure that it works for your family. Lastly, most importantly, you must have snacks. This is not Yom Kippur. People are not supposed to be listening to each other's stomachs burble on and on and on. And I know I said this in my tip that was blasted all over the internet. It went viral, I heard. But I cannot stress this enough. the more snacks you have, the happier your participants will be, young and old alike. And I put up some examples thanks to Jamie Geller. She's a really, really great blogger, all the great recipes. She's awesome, but she does edible 10 plagues. And you can see some delicious melon frogs. Boils is the bowl of oil and vinegar, which is like a little gaggy. There's some blood and wild animal, a wild animal crudité. So these are just some examples where you can have just plain old snacks, or you could make it really, really exciting and give everyone a special treat. Those are my top 6 things. But before I finish, I just want to share a couple more they didn't make it onto the list. But I did share this with Rabbi Carrie and Andrea. There is a special Zoom resource called Snap Camera that you can use. And if you are going to be Zooming through your Seder, you can download this and turn yourself into a matzah ball if you would like. It is not required, but it is highly encouraged. I wanted to show you that. And also, I am dressed like a plague, and you too can dress like a plague. Your favorite plague, darkness, wear all black. I'm obviously wild animals. You can wear all red, ask people to come up with crazy things and they will oblige. I promise. So these are the ideas that I've culled over the years as an educator, as a parent, as an obnoxious Seder participant, to having the successful Seder. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share that.
And make sure before you start your Seder, you know where your unmute button is. Sorry for the radio silence. So, Rabbi, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I love that. I'm going to look up the Jamie Geller thing. So many great tips I'd never thought of before. I will say when I like to follow the custom. This is kind of old fashioned, but I like to wear a kittel for Seder Pesach. There's a custom that people, sometimes the Seder leader, sometimes other people will wear a kittel. And a kittel is this sort of plain white garment that people have the opportunity to wear a couple of times a year. Many people wear it on Yom Kippur, and you can also wear it during a Pesach Seder. The reason I like to wear it on a Pesach Seder is because I invariably, on my white kittel, get a little bit of brisket sauce. And then when I put it on for Yom Kippur, I could just reach down and have a taste of it, or just smell it, just think when I'm hungry. So that was fantastic. Thank you very much. So I'd like to open it up to questions. Let's see, maybe we can get both me and Rabbi Aimee in the frame here. So I'd like to open it up to questions that people have. Let's see, trying to do the double spotlight thing here. Let's see, add spotlight. Here we go. Okay. So I've seen one question in the chat so far, and this is a fantastic question. I touched on this a little bit in my stories, but this is a great thing to do. Michelle asks, having MIL, mother-in-law, I assume, working on my acronyms, having a mother-in-law and stepdaughter and fiance this year, absolutely not Jewish. Suggestions. Also, she is a vegetarian. So this is a two-parter. I want to take this opportunity to dispel a misconception that I've heard, but this isn't a common fallacy that happens all the time, but I've heard this a couple of times, is in the Torah when it's talking about the original Paschal sacrifice. It said, this is something only for Jews to participate in. Non-Jewish people should not eat of the Paschal sacrifice. And what I've heard is people then extrapolate that to think that only Jewish people according to their definition of Jewish people, wherever the community they're in, should participate in a Passover seder. And I want to make it clear that that is absolutely not the case. These are sort of two different things. The Paschal sacrifice was a thing that happened, in first once in Egypt, and then in temple times. We don't do those sacrifices anymore. And so whatever rule adhered for that sacrifice is not the same as our Passover seders. In fact, many people's first Jewish experience, and this was true for me, or being with other Jewish people in a Jewish setting per se, is a Passover seder. And I've been able to sit on the Beit Din of a number of people converting to Judaism will say, what's your first Jewish experience? Time and again, that Passover seder. So it's I think it's absolutely a mitzvah to invite people who aren't Jewish to your seder, and but it also makes us mindful, and this is always a good thing, of how we speak when we're using inside language, sort of inside baseball terms, taking for granted that people understand things that we've grown up with. It's always good to be attuned to that kind of stuff for just general accessibility. But I would just preface it in the beginning saying, you are our guest. This isn't a thing that you're watching like, you're looking at an aquarium. You are here with us in this moment. This is our story that we're sharing with you, and we encourage you to ask questions. I always say there's no question that's a dumb question, only a missed opportunity for learning. And so if you preface the evening with that, it's like, we're going to do something a little bit you're not used to. Feel free to ask questions, and don't think that asking questions is rude. It's actually the point of what we're doing here. And so I think if you put and I know we've got some educators in the room here, if you put your educator hat on and say, okay, how do I break this down for a person who's asking a question, who's never encountered this before? It's not a bug of Passover, it's a feature. So I think it's fantastic that you're having these kinds of guests. To the vegetarian thing, I've not been a vegetarian before. I actually have been a vegetarian before, and have had vegetarians in my seder. Just again, it's about accommodation. It's about having options for people. My favorite thing is on the seder plate is the Paschal yam. The Paschal yam. That's the thing about everybody being on mute, is you can't hear all the laughter. The Paschal yam. One of my vegan friends would have instead of the shank bone, which is Davka not vegetarian. They would put a piece of cooked sweet potato or yam on there in the place of the lamb shank bone. So it's not the Paschal lamb, it's the Paschal yam, and it gets funnier every time I explain it. So, but different options like that. So just think about who, like anything else, think about your audience. Think about who your guests are, and pretend to be Sarah and pretend to be Abraham, and say, okay, how do I make them comfortable in this situation? And then you'll have a better experience too. Rabbi Aimee, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just that this is the perfect holiday for non-Jews, because I feel like, when we invite people to B'nai Mitzvah or Shabbat services, it can be feeling very isolating, right? You're supposed to be quiet. You're listening. You're far away from the person who's leading. But the Passover Seder, you are next to the person who's leading. You're just across the table. And so it really lends itself to interrupting, and it's really meant to be interrupted, which is great because it would be anyways. It is a dinner. And I think that, as I said before, you can't wing a seder. You can try, but if you want to feel accomplished, you shouldn't wing a seder. And so if you find yourself having questions, right? If you're leading it, someone's going to ask you to explain something. If there's something that's confusing, you reach out to a clergy person, or the Googler Rabbi, as I like to call Google, yes, or myjewishlearning.com if your clergy are not available. And try and get as much background information. But remember, you're always allowed to say, I don't know, I'll get back to you. Thank you for making me think of this. And then you move on. So it's up to you, how long you want the Seder to go, if you want to allow people to ask questions or not too. You're balancing. I see that, Michelle.
I think that the key here is, I agree 100%. And Rabbi Aimee knows me, I'm an improviser, but just kind of like putting a webinar together, the key is is preparation and improvisation sort of hand in hand. It's a little bit cooking, a little bit baking. The more you can prepare ahead of time, the more you can relax and be open to the wonder of what unfolds in the Seder itself. And so I'm going to say this is also a Seder that tends to bring out our tendencies of meticulousness, right? Of doing everything right. Some people are more careful about dietary laws on Passover than they are other times a year. Probably the best advice I ever got was from Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who would give a little symposium for the students before Passover every year in the rabbinical school. And the first thing he would say is, remember, dirt is not chametz. You're not trying to make your house spotless. You're not trying to, boil your furniture or anything like that. You can prepare. Don't make yourself crazy preparing, but you can prepare. But once you've prepared, don't feel like your preparation is wasted if things go off the rails a little bit. And if a question gets asked that you didn't think of, or if your favorite Passover glass breaks, then you just declare them married, I guess. So mazel tov. But so you can prepare a lot ahead of time, and I think that will lower your tension going into it. And then open yourself up to wonder, and don't let something going a little bit off track get you down. So let's see. I see a question from Barbara, and it's a comment from Barbara, and asking questions like, "What's your personal plague you'd like to acknowledge?" gives everyone an opportunity to participate with a personal perspective. I love this so much. This idea of having these kind of open-ended questions for people, not like, why do we drink 4 cups? Here's the reason I read in Hebrew school. Not knocking Hebrew school, but like having those questions, like, what's your favorite plague? I don't know. That's a good one. But what I really like, and I think this is what Barbara touches on. What's your Egypt, right? What's your Egypt that you've escaped from this year? What's the Egypt you're still in? And if you've escaped from Egypt, who did you leave behind? Who's still in Egypt that we could be helping right now? So I really appreciate that comment, Barbara. I want to check the chat, make sure I'm not missing anything. Michelle says, Rabbi Carrier, can you share what you developed for the first Seder you hosted? I have to look it up. It's in my Passover box that I'm slightly ashamed and slightly proud to say I haven't opened yet. But we kept all of those. And I think there's a Word doc in my Gmail from, I don't know, 12 years ago or whatever it was from, that still has it. I might do it a little bit differently, but I think you've inspired me to update it. So that might be our second Seder. But it's just, I wanted to tell that story just to say, we spend a lot of time learning our scales, and we also get to play jazz. This tradition it's a living tradition that belongs to living Jews. And this whole year has challenged us to play jazz with our scales, to figure out, okay, what is essential? What do we want to make sure doesn't get left behind? And what's the situation we have to adapt to now? So, Rabbi Aimee, before we wrap up, anything you want to add?
I don't have a box, but I once again do need to find those Haggadot. And thank you, Michelle, for allowing me to borrow them in case I can't find them. I am at the same time was really excited and totally stressed out about the Seder because I love and respect it so much, and always want to find the balance between the tradition. Rabbi Carey, you mentioned these long-standing invitations, like who does first night, who does second night, going to the same place and having the same thing every year, and also being able to improvise a little bit. It's always really hard to find that balance, and you're never going to make everyone happy. So you should try to make yourself happy, I think those are my parting words. As the leader, try to make yourself happy.
I love that, because it seems that every year at one point I hear a comment from somebody, or maybe even from me, this doesn't feel like freedom.
Eating matzah? Are you kidding?
Right. Oh. Exactly. It's like, wow. But just enjoy that matzah. Say, this was meant to make me ask the question, why am I eating this stuff? Mm-hmm. So Well, I want to thank Rabbi Aimee for participating with me in this today. I want to thank Andrea Mark, who is our able host today to help make this all possible. Gave us some great ideas. Hopefully, we'll give us some great feedback later. And I want to thank everybody who showed up for this, and thank everybody who's maybe watching this when we put this up on YouTube later. So, I want to wish everybody a little bit early. I want to wish everybody a wonderful Passover. Cherish the freedom that you have. Meditate on the freedom that you could have or give to somebody else. And if you do, and if you're open to the wonder of the Passover Seder experience, this will be a great Passover for you. I have complete faith in that. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're going to sign off now. Peace.
Chag Sameach.